I'm John from Bing Bong Beats, and today we're going to be looking at a track that my friend Phil sent me. And when I first listened to it, I got a lot of ideas about how to spice it up a little bit, with effects and drum fills and taking drums out and some filtering and also little changes to the mix. So having said that, let's get started. First thing I like to do is start all of my projects on bar 3. Usually when it comes time to export, you want to have a little bit of silence at the very beginning. It's not a huge deal to do this, but sometimes when you export starting right on a sound, you run the risk of having the sound get cut off, which results in a pop sound. So I'm just trying to avoid that here. Now I'm going to add some labels as we listen to this. Now that we've labeled each section, we're going to group the tracks. So here I'm just looking at the tracks and trying to sort them into drums, basses, tonal, and effects. The command for grouping is Command G. Now that we've organized our session more, we're going to look at the mix a little bit. You can see here we're clipping at the master, so you want all of these signals to just be in the green. Now I'm looking to find which specific tracks are clipping. In this case, there were some issues with the snare, as it was 4 different samples layered together. So the snare in this section is made up of 4 different samples, so when they're all played together at this volume, they distort. I noticed the second and third samples here are very similar, but off by 1 semitone. So I brought up the third sample by 1 semitone to get it to match the snare, and took turns muting each sample to hear which combination I liked best. Ultimately, I thought the third sample blended with the other sounds better. I noticed the 6th sample here carried a lot of the high end, and the third sample carried a lot of the low-mid punch. So to get this 5th sample to fit better, I EQ'd out the low end and the high end of it, so it's just adding some mid-range. Because it's playing more of a support role among these 3 samples, I brought it down in volume as well. I also found that the reversed bass sample was clipping a little bit at the end of it, so I brought that track down as well. So then I collapsed all of the group tracks, selected them all, and brought the volumes down. This should resolve the clipping issues we were having on the master. When listening back to it from the top, I noticed that the drum sample I removed was very important to the sound of the drums at the intro. So rather than muting that sample on the drum rack, I selected the MIDI clips of that drop Use Command J to join those clips into one. Expanded the clip view from the bottom. Selected each note that was on that track and hit 0 to deactivate them. Now that sample plays during the intro, but not during the drop. Then I used Command C and Command V to copy and paste that clip into the second drop. Next, I wanted to separate the parts in this drum rack to individual tracks. I did this by duplicating that track twice, using Command D, renaming the tracks Snare Stack, meaning the 3 snare samples all together, kick, and hi-hat. Then I went to each drum rack and deleted the samples that I didn't want. Then I added a saturator onto the drum group. I find it makes the drums punch harder. I want to change some things as we head into the drop, starting by automating the volume of the drums down. Usually I do this by automating the blue volume slider directly on the track, but I've been meaning to get in the habit of using a utility and automating the gain on that, so that I can still turn down the main volume slider without having to mess with automation data. You're able to automate almost any parameter within Ableton. All you have to do is right-click the parameter you want and click Show Automation. Then I set 2 points on this red line at 0 decibels of gain, make another point in between them, and drag this one down. You can also change the curve of your automation by holding Option as you click under the line. Fading out the drums before a drop makes the drums hit harder when they come back. Now I want some kind of riser to fill up the space that the drums used to take up. So I'm creating an audio track by right-clicking within the group that I want to create it in and selecting New Audio Track, or you could do Command T. I'm going to be grabbing a riser from my own sample pack, which you can grab from my Patreon for only $1. So to turn this impact into a riser, I turn off warping and I click Rev for reverse. Now I'm zooming in to make sure that the riser ends at the right moment. When I'm editing on a small scale like this, I use Command 4 to toggle off Snap to Grid function so I can move the sample in increments as small as I want to. Next, I'm looking at the 808 used in the drop. It feels like it only has low frequency information in it, which you can see from the EQ. In order to warm it up and get it to cut through the mix better, I added a saturator. You can experiment with different types of saturation, but in this case, I liked the sound of analog clipping. By moving this EQ to the other side of the saturator, you can see it's added some information between 100 and 1000 Hz. Adding these frequencies to your bass using a saturation can also help your bass be heard on smaller speakers like ones in your phone or laptop. I noticed there was a riser sample missing here, so I'm just copying the riser that I used in the last section and shortening it. One way to get smoother transitions is by duplicating the riser and reversing it as an impact in your next section. I found that this impact was too long for this section, so I faded it out. Now we're moving on to the claps, which I also noticed were quite loud. So I'm just going to select all 4 of them and turn down the volume on their tracks. I added an EQ to this clap to filter out the low frequencies, which just get in the way of the kick and the bass. It felt to me like this clap was splashier and less precise than the others, so I turned it down in the mix as more of a background clap. These next two tracks are similar, sort of heavily reverbed claps, so I panned them 30 to the left and 30 to the right, and I tried to get them even in volume. I added an EQ to the synth group, adding some high end to get it to stick out, and rolling off the lows since the basses supplied those frequencies. Now I'm looking at the 808 at this chill drop. I heard this take from Kenny Beats. Sidechained 808s aren't always the move. 808s are supposed to be punchy, so by sidechaining them to the kick, their punch is taken away. In this case, I agree with him. I find that this sounds tighter when I turn off the sidechain. Listening back to this build section, I felt that the claps alone weren't enough to drive us forward, so I grabbed the snare fills from the next build section, copied and pasted them into this section. I used Command E to cut the clip in half, and moved the first half to where I wanted it to start. And I wanted them to play a slightly different rhythm than the one programmed here. Here I noticed that the vocal sample was off by a little bit. You can see the sample doesn't start getting loud until a little bit after the sample starts. So here I'm just going to try to line up the louder part of the sample with the snare. Ultimately, I wanted the louder part to be a little bit after the snare rather than right on top of it. Next, I looked at this clock percussion sample. I noticed there was a lot of useless low-end information, so I filtered that out. I also turned the volume of it up a bit, so now it takes the role of a hi-hat. To help it sound more like a hi-hat, I brought up some of the higher frequencies. As we build into this chill drop, I also wanted to filter out some of the low end of this synth. I increased the resonance and automated the filter frequency. I decided this reversed synth part belonged more in the tonal section than the effects section. So I moved it all the way up there. I wanted to further alter this sound so it would stand out compared to the other instruments. It was just a matter of trial and error to figure out which effects I actually wanted. I tried this one called Fresh Air, which adds a lot of high-end information. Didn't like how that sounded. So then I tried Isotope Vinyl, which sort of softened the sound. I decided I liked that one the best. Here I noticed that the drums at this section were different than the previous sections. This is something I have no problem with, but in this circumstance I found that I liked the previous sounds better. especially the kick. The first kick I thought had more punch to it than this one. So I copied the drums over from the first drop. As you can see, I didn't think that the snare fit. So I selected that clip and hit 0 to deactivate it. Then I brought back the drum rack from the second drop and muted the kick. I also took turns muting the snare sounds of this rack to figure out what I liked best. Ultimately, I decided to keep all 3, but I turned this snap sample down. I also decided to bring in the hi-hat halfway through rather than to have it continue throughout the section. I then automated the volume up on the clock sound to replace the hi-hat. And I know I said I was trying to get in the habit of automating things on utilities, but I'm just starting to get used to that. So as you can see here, I automated it directly on the track. Here, heading into this wonky section, I wanted some drums to drop out. I wanted more of an indication that something weird was about to happen. Then I duplicated the kick pattern from before and changed the pattern to fit the new 808. Here I duplicated the kick pattern again and cut out everything except for the first kick. Listening back from the top, I decided I wanted the intro to only be 2 bars. I felt that 4 bars of just the drums alone was too much. So I deleted the second bar and moved over the first bar. So now the pattern we have was the first bar and the last bar. To fit with the drums, I wanted the bass volume to be automated down here as well. Again, I didn't use a utility. Next time, hopefully I will. I decided to pull back the drive on the saturator on the 808 here. I also decided the risers were too loud. And when soloing this one, I found that there was a lot of low frequency information that really didn't need to be there. So I filtered that out. Here I decided I wanted the claps to continue, so I just extended the clip, and there was more claps already built in. I liked how it sounded with the hi-hat in here, but I wanted it to come in a little bit later, so I cut off the first 2 eighth notes of the pattern. I also wanted to automate the volume of the clock sample down when the hi-hats came back in. Again, here I wanted to take out the hi-hats leading into the wonky section. I copied the riser from the first build so that it was clear that we were heading somewhere again. But I only wanted a little piece of it, and I decided against that sample entirely. So I went back to my sample pack and found a different one. I thought this short, weird effects sample was perfect to get you ready for this short, weird section. I wanted the sample to start on beat 3 and end on beat 1 of the next bar, so I had to stretch it. I found that the tones algorithm sounded good for this sound. I really liked the idea of that sine sweep sample, and it reminded me of one that I have in my own sample pack. So I decided to drop that in. Here I decided that I liked the original hi-hat sample better than the ones that were here already, so I pasted it in and cut it to come back with the kick. Leading into this build, I wanted the clock samples to come up in volume. I thought this whole section could use a little bit more space. I liked the filtered sound of the drums, and I liked all the parts of the tonal instruments. But I thought it could all be put into like a grander space. So I went to the reverb return track, filtered out a bunch of the low end, added some saturation, and sent the drums and the tonal section to that return track. But I wanted to automate these sends on so that this reverb wasn't constant throughout the song, so it was only for this section. I also decreased it gradually as we got towards the drop, and did the same for the drums. I then automated the reverb return track off just before we got to the drop. I also didn't want the snare to hit on this last beat before the drop. I did more filtering on the synths here, as you can see, leading into the drop as well. I wanted there to be some kind of break on this beat, so I took out the hi-hats, took out the 808, and resampled the synthesizer. To resample, all you have to do is create a new audio track, click the drop-down menu where it says X'd in, and select Resample. Then arm the track, and solo what you want to resample. Then hit record. All I wanted here was half of a bar. So I then selected that half of a bar in the original synth tracks, cut that section, and deactivated it by hitting 0. I resampled this section because I wanted to process these synths differently, just for this one moment. So here I'm just experimenting with different warp algorithms. You can get some cool stuttery rhythmic effects when you use the transient algorithm. It was a bit tough to get the result that I wanted from this synth. So rather than focusing on the algorithm, I grabbed Dimension Expander. Here I'm experimenting with what it would sound like if I automated these different parameters over the course of this half bar. In the end, I was happy with just this setting. Then I went back to focus on making this synth rhythmic. In order to get the result that I wanted, I cut out the second chord and stretched just that chord to be twice as long using the ×2 button under the segment BPM. I set it to preserve 30-second notes and to preserve only the beginning of each transient, which creates this aggressive stutter effect. Here I'm just trying to get the volume of this chord to match the rest of them. After focusing on just this one part for so long, when I listened back to the mix, I realized that I wanted the synths to be louder overall. So I automated the volume of them up. I also wanted a different effect to be applied to the fourth chord in this progression. So I chopped that chord out and warped it using the texture mode. And I also stretched it to be twice as long. I really liked what Phil did here with the synth, turning it from a pluck into a pad for the next section. I took out some of the low end of this track, and I also tried adding a saturator, but I didn't like the change that made. Instead, I opted for iZotope's vinyl plugin. Listening back in context, When I listened back in context, I decided that the vinyl was a little too much, and I wanted to add back clarity to this track gradually. In order to achieve that, I had to automate the frequency cutoff of multiple points on this EQ, as well as the year setting on the iZotope vinyl plugin. Once again, I wanted to automate the volume up of the clock sample as we approached the post-drop section. Here I experimented with adding the kick-in during this build section. But instead I decided to bring it in during the next 8 bars. Again, it took some experimentation to decide on the correct pattern. Ultimately, this is the pattern I landed on. Here I decided to take out the vocal sample for whatever reason, and automated the volume of the clock sample up, as well as sending it to the reverb. Here I decided I liked the sample at the end, but I wanted it to overlap with the end of the song a little bit more. On the next listen through, I decided to turn down some of the clap samples as well as the build snare. I also decided to turn off this snare roll and save it for later. Here I decided to resample the harp so that I could use it as an effect. Once again, I just wanted a small snippet. I used the Beats algorithm to create a plucky sound with it. Brought it up an octave, and filtered out the lows. For the time being, I sent it to a reverb, but decided I wanted to send it to an echo later on. Here I brought down the volume of some of the effects again. I have a pretty bad habit of keeping my effects too loud. I also decided I wanted this effect to move from your left channel to the right, so I automated that in. I also sent this slide whistle sound to the reverb, and automated the reverb off when the beat came back in. Once again, I took out the percussion here at the end of the loop. Now I experimented with putting the reverbed clap samples at different parts in the beat. Again, I wanted the bass volume to come down at the end of this build. Here I copied the stuttery harp effect that I created before. Now repurposing it in the build section. This is also when I decided that I wanted to send it to an echo. I copied and pasted this effect around the whole track. I brought in this riser one more time. And I lined up all the tracks to cut at the same moment. And listening back, I decided I wanted the bass to do something here, but I wanted it to have a different tone, so I automated up the drive on the saturator for just this moment. I decided I wanted a soft riser at this moment, so I brought in another one for my sample pack and lined it up. I also thought it would be cool to combine the volume automation on the bass with some filter automation. Here I thought it would be cool if we brought in the harp part from the last build, bringing it up an octave so it stands out a little more. I also added a fade as we headed into the drop. And that's about it. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer them. Thanks for watching, and the full beat will play right after this.